guys have been studying either the vocabulary specifically that Mrs. Lazan has sent us or specifically about the Holocaust for the last several weeks. I've enjoyed being in your classrooms if you guys have done that, and I'm sure today will be a very special treat to get a firsthand, a primary source of experience of somebody who's actually lived through what you guys have been able to study. So we feel very fortunate to have her today with us. Very honored to be able to have her and her husband, Nathaniel, coming in all the way from New York. But without further ado, I'm going to give the microphone to Mrs. Clam. She's going to share some research. She's written an essay as part of what you guys have been doing in the classroom, and her essay was selected as one, and she's going to read that and then introduce Mrs. Lazan. So, Kimry, give her a round of applause.
More about the Holocaust. There are many times in history that are considered very dark. One very dark time happened during World War II when millions of Jews and other people were killed by the Nazis. This is what most people know as the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler was the head of the Nazi Party, which did the killings of between 5 and 6 million Jews. Jews were sent to concentration camps where many of them died. There were survivors who required a long road to recovery. Time has allowed them the opportunities to share their survival stories. On January 30th, 1933, in Germany, Adolf Hitler took control and the mistreatment of Jews began. The Germans blamed the Jews for the economic problems affecting the German lives. Early stages of the Holocaust involved the Germans making laws where Jews could live, what they could own, and even what they could wear. Jews were required to wear a yellow star on all of their clothing that said Jude, Jew, and German. Failure to follow the rules led to immediate death or punishment. This led to some Jews going into hiding. If a person was caught hiding a Jew, the consequence was often being hung or sent to a concentration camp. Millions of Jews and other prisoners were sent to concentration camps. Not all of the prisoners were Jews. Some were gypsies, some homosexuals, and other disabled or of other religions. In all, there were about 20,000 camps established, but there were 23 that were used most. The concentration camp inmates were transported by trains or buses. The conditions that the prisoners were kept in were horrible. Prisoners were fed, but the calories that they were given were very small and did not allow the prisoners to live well. Calories ranged from 1,700 calories a day for the stronger men who could work to less than 1,300 calories a day for sick or weak prisoners. A large number of them died due to starvation, disease, illness, weakness, poisonous gas, or getting shot. If a prisoner tried to escape the camp, they would most likely not succeed. Only a few were able to successfully escape. Others who were caught trying were shot and killed immediately. The deadliest camps were the extermination camps. Auschwitz is infamous for the most deaths. World War II ended on May 8, 1945, when the Allied forces removed Hitler and the Nazis from power. This war lasted about 12 years. After the war, Hitler and many other Nazi soldiers killed themselves because of what they had done. There were approximately 200,000 Jews that had survived. People began telling their stories about what had happened to them. Books like The Diary of Anne Frank and 4 Perfect Pebbles by Marian Lazan gave people a better understanding of what went on during the war and how Jews lived in hiding. The Holocaust was a very dark time during history. This period of time, from 1933 to 1945, saw about 6 million Jews killed and about 5 million non-Jews killed, most of them in concentration camps. The history and stories from the survivors have played a role in helping to keep this from happening again. We have read about history in our textbooks. We have Googled topics on the internet. We have even watched documents on the History Channel, but there are very few opportunities in our lives to actually sit in the same room with someone who has survived and truly lived moments of history. Today, you will have the unique experience and privilege of hearing firsthand from a woman who is both a Holocaust survivor and a witness to history. I hope that you will listen, understand, and appreciate the message of hope, courage, and compassion that she will share with you today. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you our special guest, Mrs. Marion Blumenthal Lazan.
Thank you, Kimray, for your meaningful and kind introduction and for sharing your beautiful, meaningful essay with all of us. And many thank yous to Mrs. Ashcraft and, of course, to you, your principal, Mr. Beauchamp, for giving me the opportunity to speak to and with you, the students here at the Waller Middle School. And thank you for a wonderful lunch. We visited Oklahoma several times, spoke here on various occasions, but I knew that I would be back here sooner or later. This afternoon, I'm here to share my story with you. It is my childhood experiences during World War II in the concentration camps. I will tell you about our liberation and how we finally started our lives anew in our blessed United States of America. Mine is a story that Anne Frank might have told had she survived. And as most of you know, I think all of you know, Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl who died along with most of her family in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. This is also a story that conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. After the presentation, time permitting, I will be pleased to answer some of your questions. Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family, as it is here for most of you today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incidents there would ever lead to very much. My father was in a successful shoe business in a small town. My parents, 2-year older brother, and I lived comfortably with my grandparents above the shoe store. Life for Jews was made increasingly more difficult, and in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were formulated and enforced. The following are just some of the many restrictions imposed on the Jews in Germany. Jews were not allowed into theaters, into parks, or into swimming pools. All public schools were closed to Jewish children. Then there was an evening curfew for the Jews. Jews were only allowed to shop during specific hours of the day, and non-Jews were not allowed to shop in Jewish-owned stores. Non-Jews were just not allowed to associate with Jewish people. And then a big letter J for Jew was stamped on ID cards and on passports. These restrictions went on, and it was then that my parents decided to make arrangements to leave the country. My grandparents, who were in their late 70s and ill, could not understand the reason for leaving, and they passed away in 1938, just 11 days within each other. Soon thereafter, we received our necessary papers for our emigration to America. I was just 4 years old at that time. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night. It was the night of broken glass, when the Nazis and their many followers smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores. Jewish establishments, synagogues, and Jewish books were burned and destroyed. This was the beginning of a massive pogrom against the Jews in Germany, a massive verbal and physical assault against all German Jews. In reality, this was the beginning of the Holocaust. On November 12th, following Kristallnacht, the German government actually fined the Jewish population for the damage caused that night. These imposed taxes were used to rearm Germany. The night of Kristallnacht, my father was taken away from our home and, unbeknownst to my mother, was sent to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. All sorts of terrible stories were related to my mother, and we did not know if we would ever see my father again. He was released after 10 days only because our papers were in order for our emigration to America. And to think that just a few years prior, he had been awarded the Iron Cross for his military service in the German Army of World War I. We were forced to sell both our home and our business for a fraction of its worth. And soon thereafter, in January of 1939, we left for Holland, from where we were to sail to the United States. And for almost 9 months, while awaiting our quota number from the American State Department, my parents were assigned to take care of some 125 children. These young children had been sent by their parents from various parts of Europe to escape from the Nazis. In December of that year, 1939, we were deported to the detention camp of Westerbork in Holland to await our departure date to America. Camp Westerbork was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe. In May of 1940, just 1 month before our planned departure date, the Germans invaded Holland and we were trapped. All of our belongings, which were about to be loaded on board ship, were burned and destroyed as the harbor of Rotterdam was bombed. Under Dutch control, Camp Westerbork was tolerable. My mother, father, brother, and I shared 2 small rooms. We all ate in a communal dining room, and at that time there was enough food for us so that we did not go hungry. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to repair shoes. My mother worked in the kitchen. We children had a makeshift education and lived a very dull, stagnant life. Several months later, when the Nazi SS took over the command of Westerbork, we became acquainted with the ever-present, terrifying 12-foot-high barbed wire. And as thousands of Jews were rounded up, many taken from their hiding places, as was Anne Frank and her family, Camp Westerbork became overcrowded. And it was at that time that we had to share our small quarters with another family. And then the dreadful transports to the concentration and extermination camps in Eastern Europe began. This started in early 1942, and from then on, every Monday night, lists of those to be deported were posted, causing incredible anxiety, anguish, and fear. And then on Tuesday morning, men, women, and little ones were marched to a nearby railroad platform from where they were transported. This area became known as Boulevard de Misère. It was an area of complete misery. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the train left for their destination towards the extermination and concentration camps. And of the total 120,000 souls that departed Westerbork, 102,000 were doomed never to return. In 1944, it was our turn to be shipped out. We children were actually glad for a change of environment. We were very naive, and we welcomed the move. We were allowed to take 1 knapsack each, and whatever we could stuff into it, we were permitted to take. When we approached the railroad platform and we saw the cattle cars in which we were to travel, our fears began to mount. Adults suspected, and they somehow knew what was in store for us. I remember that it was a bitter cold, pitch black, rainy night when we arrived at our destination, concentration camp Bergen-Belsen in Germany. We were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars and greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us, and threatening us with their rifles and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I was a very frightened 9-year-old, and to this day I still feel a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German Shepherd. Bergen-Belsen was divided into various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers, and in the evening, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the campgrounds. We were placed in a section that was known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp, named so because we had to continue wearing that yellow star which had been issued to us back in Holland. Men were on one side of the camp and the women on the other, and this did make it possible at times for families to get a glimpse of one another. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress. And this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very lucky that I was able to share a bunk with my mother, and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine 2 adults, 2 strangers, sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions? A bunk that was no larger than the small cot bed that we're all so familiar with. I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance. In the most primitive outhouses, toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy, there was no toilet paper, there was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slush through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every morning, every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread a day, a pat of butter, some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peel. The bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were neat and in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. Once a month, we were marched to an area to shower, and there, under the watchful eyes of the guards, we were ordered to undress. We had heard about exterminations and gas chambers in other areas of Europe, and we therefore were never sure when the faucets were turned on as to what would come out, water or gas. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape. even though they knew that the chance to succeed was next to impossible. But they also felt that they had nothing more to lose. The failure of their attempts were obvious when we saw their lifeless bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence. The dark, crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. I know, of course, that you've all heard, you've read, you've studied, you may have seen movies, perhaps even 2 documentaries about the Holocaust. But the constant foul odor, the filth, continuous horror, and fear surrounded by death is indescribable. There is no way that this can be put accurately into words or pictures. Our bodies, hair, and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there was a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time was taken up with make-believe games, and one game, a game based on superstition, became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the 3rd or 4th pebble? Might that mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not pull through? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomach shrunk so that the hunger was no longer painful. Teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition and were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. One day, my mother was able to smuggle some potatoes and some salt from the kitchen where she worked. Using an empty can as a pot and pieces from the wooden slats from our bunk as firewood, my mother somehow managed to cook some soup in secret. This was done on our bunk. I was on the bunk with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. Soup was simmering, just about finished, when the German guards entered our barrack for surprise inspection. In our rush to hide that setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure that if I had cried out, it would have cost us our lives. This happened in the spring of 1945. I was just 10 years old. The population in Camp Bergen-Belsen were dying off rapidly, but not nearly fast enough to satisfy the Nazis. Several weeks later, it was decided to send 3 trainloads of our people to Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. It was April of 1945. Russian army was closing in from the northeast, and the British and the Americans from the west. Under normal conditions, this train ride from Bergen-Belsen to whatever area of Eastern Europe they're going to send us would have taken no more than 10 hours. But because the Germans tried to evade the Allies, we were en route for 2 long weeks without food, without water, without medical supplies, without sanitary facilities, no toilets. Whenever the train came to a stop, those who were able and those who were strong enough were permitted to get out and take a drink from a nearby stream or dig up roots to eat. My mother remembered taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive. And who knows what else that pot was used for. The need for water at that time was almost more important than food because of the severe dehydration due to the dysentery and the high fever due to the typhus. Typhus is a highly contagious, deadly disease that's caused from filth and spread by lice. At the same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and buried along the tracks. In addition, our train was subject to frequent air attacks by the Allies. It is truly remarkable how any one of us was able to survive under such horrendous conditions. In fact, 500 of our people, that's 1 out of every 5, died en route or shortly thereafter. My burned leg was severely infected, and it was impossible to keep the wound clean or lice-free. In late April, after 14 days of this surreal and horrifying journey, the German guards stormed frantically through the train, demanding civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And we knew then that the war was coming to an end. It was the Russian army that liberated our train and led us to a nearby farm village in eastern Germany. Most of the inhabitants had fled, and we took over their homes. Kitchens were stocked with ample food. It was rich and good, actually much too good for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 60 kilos, or as we know it here, 35 pounds. And my mother weighed a mere 60 pounds. The Russians, in their crude way, tried to help us the best that they could. I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention. My leg was in very bad condition, and I was close to losing it. Fortunately, it was decided to treat the wound, and I was very lucky that my leg responded to medication, and it gradually healed. As I regained my strength, I also relearned to walk. And in the interim, our heads were shaved because that was the only way that we could rid ourselves of head lice. Although we were all weak, ill, and thoroughly exhausted, I vividly remember the spring of 1945. The weather was beautiful, sunny and bright. Trees and grass were lush and green. Flowers were in bloom. The birds were singing. It was a wonderful, exciting feeling to be free at long last. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it 6 weeks after our liberation, and this after 6.5 years of mental torment and physical abuse. My 12-year-old brother Albert actually helped bury our father. When I talk about those years, it is as though I'm relating a nightmare, a very bad dream. I separate myself from it ever having happened to me, and that is how I deal with it. It is a wonderful story of how we gradually recuperated and were sent back to Holland to start our lives anew. My brother and I were eventually placed in a children's home in preparation to live in Palestine. The positive vote of the United Nations back in November of 1947 to partition Palestine between Arabs and Jews led to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Most of the children in this home survived alone, without their parents. I felt like a total misfit. I needed to learn how to resettle into a normal society, had no training for that. Here I was by this time, 11 years old, had never been in a store, had no idea what money was all about. I had almost no table manners. It was like learning to live all over again. It was in this home that we became reacquainted with life in its normal state. Meals served us were delicious and nourishing, and you can imagine that just about anything and everything tasted good to us. And though our surrogate parents provided a very strict environment, much love and care were given us. I began my first formal education at that time at the age of 11 and a half. We were taught the secular subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, in a Montessori school where we progressed at our own pace. The Dutch language in which we were taught was all new to us. We also received a thorough education in Hebrew and in religious studies. The British, who were governing Palestine in the 1940s, had issued what was known as the White Paper, restricting the number of Jews permitted into the land. And they were intercepting many of the refugee ships and interning the survivors on the island of Cyprus. And in some cases, they actually turned the ships back to Europe. In 1947, just 1 year prior to Israel becoming a state, our illegal voyage from Holland to Palestine was planned, and danger once again loomed over us. And because parents at that time were not permitted to accompany their children, my mother managed to make arrangements for a family of 3 to emigrate to the United States. And thanks to the Holland America line, we were able to use the tickets which had been purchased 10 years earlier. We arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, April 23rd, 1948. By coincidence, exactly 3 years to the day of our liberation. It was a Jewish relief organization that found a home for us in Peoria, Illinois. Never, ever heard of Illinois, definitely not Peoria. And there, at the age of 13, I once again started life anew in a strange land and again learning a new language, my third new language in less than 3 years. First Dutch, then Hebrew, and now English. And because of my inability to speak English, I, at the age of 13, was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds. Although both my brother and I worked long hours after school to help our mom pay bills, I nevertheless found time. I actually made time to take extra courses during the year, attend summer school, and by working very hard in my studies, I was able to be graduated from Peoria Central High School 5 years later at age 18, ranking 8th in a class of 267 students. It was 2 months after high school graduation that I was married to Marian Lazan, who I had met at the age of 16 in Peoria. And God willing, we'll be celebrating our 63rd wedding anniversary this coming August. I am grateful. I am very grateful that I survived healthy in body, mind, and spirit, and that together with my husband, I'm able to perpetuate my heritage with a wonderful family. We have 3 grown children, all 3 are happily married, and they've given us 9 beautiful grandchildren and 2 extraordinary, magnificent great-granddaughters. Amazing, amazing. And in March of 1996, my memoir, For Perfect Pebbles, co-authored by Lila Pearl, was published by Green Willow, division of HarperCollins. It is now in its 28th printing in hardback, available in paperback by Avon and Scholastic Book Club. Many of you will get your signed copy sometime this week. Has been translated into German, into Dutch, into Hebrew, and if you like, you may all read it in Japanese. Maybe there's someone here who can do just that. But above all, I am so grateful that the story is in book form so that it can be passed on to future generations. And I'm thrilled that a documentary has been made entitled Marion's Triumph with the actress Deborah Messing as the narrator. It's been aired over PBS stations throughout the country these past several years. So you see that despite all the terrible things that happened to me as a child, my life today is full and rewarding. Before I answer your questions, I have a very important favor to ask of each and every one of you in this auditorium. And Mr. Beauchamp and Mrs. Ashcraft, I'm so grateful that it is so filled. Although I've spoken to upward of 1 million students and adults over these past 25 years or so, it still has not become easy. However, I do realize the importance of sharing that period of our history with you, simply because in a few short years, we will not be here any longer to give a first-hand account. Yours is the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand. And I therefore ask you to please share my story or any of the Holocaust stories that you read and hear about. Share them with your friends. Share them with your relatives. And someday, share them with your children. And yes, even with your grandchildren. When we are not here any longer, it is you who will have to bear witness. As difficult as it is, the horror of the Holocaust must be taught, must be studied, and kept alive. Only then can we guard it from ever happening again. This is the very yellow star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. It was just another way to denigrate us, to isolate us, and to set us apart from the rest of society. This represents the Star of David, a beautiful, meaningful Jewish symbol, but the Nazis made it so very ugly. Each of us, each and every one of us must do everything in our power to prevent such hatred, such destruction, and such terror from reoccurring. And we can begin by having love, respect, and tolerance towards one another, regardless of the religious belief, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the national origin. This respect towards one another must begin in our homes, around the kitchen table, the dining room table, wherever we gather as a family. We, the adults, must pass it on in our places of business. You, the students, in your classrooms, in the halls of your school, communities, towns, cities, and only if there is respect and tolerance towards one another in the countries can we expect to have peace in the world. We must begin with you, the students. We must begin with our children. Let us treat people as individuals. Let us look for similarities and respect the differences. Let us build bridges and reach out towards one another. And we must be true to ourselves and not blindly follow a leader without thinking ahead and searching our hearts and our minds as to what the consequences might be. It is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what his or her true intentions are. Please, please remember these messages. Share them with your friends who are unable to be here this afternoon. Share them, remember them, but above all, let us all live by them. We're all aware, or we should be, that 6 million Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust of the Second World War. Your state of Oklahoma has a population of approximately 4 million. Can you possibly imagine the entire population of Oklahoma plus 2 more million wiped out? The 6 million also represent 1/3 of the entire pre-World War II Jewish population. Among them were 1.5 million children just like you. We also need to remember that there were 5 million non-Jews who lost their lives. Among them were the righteous Gentiles, as we refer to them, very special people, non-Jews who jeopardized their lives to save Jewish families. They would hide them in the attics. They would hide them in the basements. Farmers would hide them out in a barn. They were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they felt was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. And that brings me to another message. We must never generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. These are all universal messages, messages that each and every one of us is familiar with to varying degrees, but need to be reminded of over and over again. And this certainly was a good opportunity to do so. These messages are the lessons learned from that dark period of our history and certainly apply to today's world situation and definitely to our own individual lives. By listening, I hope that you prevent our past from becoming your future. I now would like to share something with you about a very special lady, my mom, and this was my mother on her 104th birthday. Amazing lady. Sadly, Mom passed away 3 years ago, 6 weeks short of 105. Amazing, amazing lady. Took one medication for high blood pressure. I decided long ago that Tylenol is not a medication. Okay, Mom, we need to put you right here for everyone to admire you. Perfect, right? Perfect. Now you know why I need a table like this, right? Okay, Mr. Pocha. When we would be home for us is the South Shore of Long Island in New York. We would see my mom all the time. She only lived about 20 minutes from us in her own apartment with help towards the end. And when we would travel, and oh my goodness, do we travel. Since January, I spoke in Florida, in North Carolina, in Alabama, in Iowa, in California. Now we're here, New Jersey a couple of times. I mean, we schlep a lot. And when we travel, we used to speak to my mother several times a day. And that reminds me that you too need to check in with your moms and your dads. Always tell them where you're going and be sure you tell them when you'll be back. They need to know that, and you guys all owe it to them. Right? Right. Okay. My brother deals with this altogether differently than I do. He will not talk about it as freely as you heard it from me this afternoon. Lives in California, happily married, but by choice will not bring children into this world. Has a very difficult time with organized religion. All of that makes me very sad. But I do not fault Albert. We have to remember he is 2 years older than I am, was with my father in the men's section. And I'm convinced that he saw and experienced things that I did not. God puts us on this earth. Gives us a beautiful mind. It is this mind that allows us to choose right from wrong, good from evil. We are capable of making choices. Therefore, men did this to one another. But did he have to make it so bitterly cold when we were standing out there on the Pell all day? I have a direct line. I ask loads and loads of questions. Don't get too many answers, but that is okay. Faith I will always have. After all, here I am, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 2 great-granddaughters from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survived so that we will always be here. I'm proud of my faith, as I'm certain you are proud of your faith and of your heritage. But please, please, let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful and tolerant towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Had there been respect and tolerance towards one another some 70 years ago, I would not be here this afternoon to share that dark period of our history with you. 9/11 would not have occurred. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, North Korea, all these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. It is such a simple message and yet so difficult to achieve. There is very little that we can do against the negativity in our world. But how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. Did I ever find my 4 pebbles? Frequently asked question. I always found my 4 pebbles. Made it my business to find them. Cheated all the time. When I found them, I put them in a safe place. Next time I would search for them, I couldn't find that 3rd one or that 4th one. Well, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. Maybe that was cheating, but it was my game, and guess who made the rules? You need to know that I was only about 9 or 10 years old when things were at its absolute worst. We had nothing to occupy our time with constructively. No paper, no pencils, no books, no games. So I was lucky in such an imaginative mind, and my imaginative games were always based on a positive attitude. I would search for a piece of glass or a piece of a mirror, whatever I could find on the dirt ground in Bergen-Belsen. And when the sun would shine, and I, Marion, knew that that sun would always come out. And when it did, that little piece of glass would cast a reflection onto the ground. And that little wiggly reflection, it became my pet. As long as the sun would shine, I would have my pet, and my pet would never ever die. I would also imagine that one day I once again would have my 3 B's. And these 3 B's represent our everyday comforts and necessities that we all take so much for granted. First B represented a bed. I knew that someday I once again would have my very own bed with a real mattress, clean sheets, and enough blankets to keep me warm. Second B represented a bath, warm water soap, clean towel, and with that would come toothpaste and a toothbrush, of course. And the third B, what do you think? You are 6th graders? What do you think was the third B? Something that we eat starts with a B. Bread. Well, breakfast bread. Bread. I knew that someday I once again would have enough bread so that I would never again go hungry. These imaginative games, if you will, they were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. Do you know that we all have survival techniques and skills within us? When the need arises, we just have to search for them, find them, and be sure that we put them to work. No one is spared adversity. No one is spared hardship. We all have to overcome obstacles at one time or another. But with perseverance, with determination, with faith, and above all hope, one can overcome just about anything and everything. Above all, don't ever, ever give up hope. It is not so much what happens to a person, it is how we deal with the situation that makes the difference. I came to America, and I got acquainted with potato chips. And whoever was eating them was dipping in something white and creamy. I was so sure that that was mayonnaise. I didn't know from dips. Anyway, I couldn't wait to get my own big bag of potato chips and my own jar of mayonnaise. And oh my goodness, did that do a job on me. I very quickly became a big 13-year-old. And remember, there I was with these little 9-year-olds. You know, they could have made plenty fun of me. I looked differently than they did, definitely acted differently than they did. But I need you to know that they were so good to me. They helped me with my homework. They included me in their games. I hope that when a new student comes into your class, into your school, into your community, that you too help him or her to adjust to a new situation. Put yourself in his or her place, how you might feel if you're placed in a strange and new environment. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. And you, the students here at the Waller Middle School, you are so fortunate to be receiving a good education in a beautiful environment with dedicated teachers and principal and librarian. Do not take your educational opportunities for granted. Make the most of it. Give your studies that extra measure of hard work. You will never, ever regret it. Nathaniel's from New York. He went to Bradley University in Peoria. Lucky me. Went home on vacations, and way back then in the 1950s, long-distance telephone calls were very expensive. There were no computers, there were no emails, but for a 3-cent stamp, and there really was such a thing as a 3-cent stamp, we would write to one another every single day. Major problems. In his letters to me, he would add 5 words. I know that there were 10 words, Lazan. Whatever they were way too many words that he asked me to define and put into a sentence. That's a lot of nerve with all I had to do. But I knew he meant to help me with my English, and I guess it did work. So thank you, Nathaniel. I, on the other hand, would write my letters in rough draft with a dictionary by my side, and only when I was satisfied with the way the letter was written would I dare mail it to him. Talking about a dictionary. My father always carried a little chunky German-English dictionary with him, and he would study the vocabulary in secret whenever possible, always with the hope that someday he would reach America. When we came to the United States back in 1948 and approached New York Harbor, we were told the night before that if we wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, we needed to be on deck bright and early the next morning. Well, you can be sure that each and every one of us was on deck to greet and be greeted by that magnificent symbol of freedom, the freedom that had been denied us for so many years. And to this day, when we cross the Verrazano Bridge, okay, Enid, Oklahoma definitely needs an explanation. Okay, the Verrazano Bridge is a long bridge in New York that connects the borough of Staten Island with that of Brooklyn. And when we reach a certain point on that bridge, I will always crane my neck to see the Statue of Liberty. It's a most beautiful, meaningful, magnificent sight. Next time when you're in the big city, make it your business to visit the Statue of Liberty. Do I still speak those languages? Ik spreek een klein beetje Hollands. I speak a little bit of Dutch. Anime de berre de vriekgezat. I speak some Hebrew. Ich spreche ein sehr gutes Deutsch. I speak an excellent German. And I do speak some English. Okay. Questions. Anyone with questions? I was told I had lots of time. Right. Okay. Questions, anyone? Did I ever meet Anne Frank is a frequently asked question. Anne Frank was in the same camps I was in, but we have to remember that her name did not become well known until after her diary was found and published. Prior to that, she was just one of us. She was just Anna. And the story you heard this afternoon really picks up where hers left off. We only know her story while she was in hiding. We know nothing about her experiences in the camps. And in addition to that, she was 6 years older than I am. And you know very well that a 15-year-old has next to nothing to do with a 9-year-old. So even if I might have seen her, it had very little meaning at that time. Questions? Anyone? Go ahead. Okay. Why did they have numbers tattooed on the arm? First of all, let me explain. It was not done in Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was only a concentration camp. It was done in the extermination camps like Auschwitz for no reason. You ask why? There was no reason other than to torment our people, inflict pain, and to dehumanize them. No more name, just a number. And believe me, there was no anesthesia when they burned those long numbers on the arms of men, women, and little ones, children. And after they had no more use for them, children in particular, into the gas chambers and eliminated, period. It's a mentality none of us will ever understand. And these men and women went home to their own families that night as though they had a 9-to-5 job. Unimaginable. Okay, question. Anyone? And you have to stand up so I know who I'm speaking to. Perfect. Have I ever won a Nobel Peace Prize? Ooh, maybe you could do something about that. Very good. That's a first one for there. Where are you, Nathaniel? Okay, go ahead. What was the best place that I've ever visited? You heard from many places. Right here in Enid, Oklahoma. Okay, what did we have to wear? There were no uniforms like you sometimes see the striped things. In our camp, not. We could wear whatever we had. And remember, we only had this one knapsack, so there wasn't a whole lot of many changes of clothing, that's for sure. And I might have had just one change of clothing, but after a while, it was just in tethers. It were just in rags. And remember, we had no way of washing those clothes. And they always fit me around, but they got short on me. We were in rags when we were liberated. And there we mentioned at lunchtime today that we came up on this little farm village. 2,000 of us, remember 500 of our people passed away along the way, and 2,000 of us came up on this little farm village, population 700. And here we were, skeletal, in rags, and many of them just fled, and that must have been some sight for them as well. Okay. You know their names, that's good. Okay. Who survived the camp? Okay. Do I know anyone else who survived the camp? Yes, I do. Many of my friends, of course, did not make it. But those who did, some of them live in Israel, and we have children and grandchildren living in that country. And whenever we visit there, we do that frequently, we always meet up with our friends. It's a very comforting feeling. We have a special bond with one another, and it works very well. Not that we are commiserate and are sad, but it's a connection that we have. And it's a very good feeling to be with them. Yeah, good question. Oh, what language? I think I speak English the best now. I do speak a very good German, and we returned to Germany let me just explain my return trip to Germany, okay? We returned to Germany on several occasions. The very first time was back in 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of our liberation, and we visited my father's grave. And the reason my father and about 60 others have a private resting place in that farm village where we were liberated was because they died after some of the chaos had subsided. Those who died early on were all buried in mass graves. We also went to Bergen-Belsen, and Bergen-Belsen looks nothing the way I remembered it. Had been burned down under the direction of President Eisenhower, who was then the commander of the Allied forces, because the conditions of the camp would have created tremendous health hazards for that entire region of Germany. So today, other than the newly built documentation and exhibition centers, Bergen-Belsen looks like a park. Green grass, shrubs, trees, not bad looking at all, except for mounds everywhere, mounds with flags that read, "Here lie 1,000, here lie 2,500. These are the mass graves of our people. And then we went to my former hometown of Hoya near Hanover, and they were greeted by public officials who apologized over and over again. And then there was a non-Jewish couple, Heike and Hansud, born after the war. They took us to the Jewish cemetery, which was in terrible disarray, had not been cared for since 1938. And they took us to our family plot, and there among the toppled over stones was a brand new shiny granite footstone with the inscription "Zur Erinnerung an die zerstörte Grabstelle der Familie Blumenthal, Hoya 1894 bis 1938. in memory of the desecrated plot of the Blumenthal family, Hoya 1894 to 1938, placed there by this non-Jewish young couple, unbeknownst to us. A most beautiful, generous, kind gesture. And believe me, I never thought that I would refer to non-Jewish Germans in such glowing terms. And they became dear friends of ours. They actually shared in Mom's 100th birthday celebration. Now, no one in their right mind will travel from Europe to New York for 4 days in February to sightsee. I mean, amazing, amazing people. And each time we return, I speak in schools, universities, and churches, and I do so in German. Tremendously well received, but oh so difficult for today's young people to hear. After all, it happened in their country by their own people, their grandparents and great-grandparents' generation. It's a huge, huge burden for these young people. And unfortunately, it will be their burden for generations to come. And then we returned a number of years ago. Why? Because a brand new public high school in my former hometown was named in my honor. So now we have the Marion Blumenthal Hauptschule in Hoya. Tremendous celebration, classmen, musicians, fine food, and very courageous for this little town to redress what happened so many years ago in their midst. And the night before the celebration, we commemorated the night of broken glass on the site where our synagogue once stood. Always very difficult to return, but never any regrets. That's for sure. Okay, how much time do we have? Still some time? And then I have to wind down a few more things to cover. Yeah. Very, very good question. Do I feel that historical fiction, For Perfect Pebbles, is a biography? It's a non-fiction book, but historical fiction are very important. They are based on reality. They may not be the real thing, but it's based on reality, and it's a educational to read them for sure. Okay? There's much to be learned from those books as well, 100%. Yes, sir. Okay, just wanted to let you know that it is mandatory in Germany for them to study the Holocaust. And they're encouraged to visit the camps. And there's always something that they remind their people of what happened at that time. For instance, about 8-9 years ago, something new was proposed. It was called, they came up with what's known as a Stolperstein, a stumbling block. This is a metal plaque that's embedded in the sidewalk in front of the house where the person once lived and never returned, with his name or her name, date of birth, where, when, and how he or she died. It's on the plaque. There is no way that it can be removed. And so this was just 8-9 years ago. Remember, all of this happened 70-some years ago. So there's constantly something that they remind their own people. They're doing their very best to make sure that this does not happen again, and above all, to remind them, yes, it happened right here. Watch out, okay? All right, you guys, I have a website, okay? Now you have to bear with me, okay? Because I know nothing about computers. Nathaniel's the computer guy. Okay, I have a website. You stay right there, Nathaniel. Okay, now the thing is called forperfectpebbles.com. F-O-U-R spelled out. Good. Now, it's got a front page. It's called the front home page. And there is, on this thing, is
red YouTube icon.
red, and I have an icon, and mine is red, yes? Okay, is it always red? Always red. So this thing is red, and if you push it, select it, presented, you will find a video pertaining to the naming of the school. It's in German, English subtitle. Check it out. It is okay.
A YouTube icon on there, click that, and you can see all the videos that shows your school.
Very good. Ooh, you're good. Okay. All right. You guys, I have something else. I have a Facebook. Okay. I know I have a Facebook, and I was told you would come and check the Facebook.
Come visit.
Visit. Okay, visit the Facebook. You know, by now you know I know nothing about this stuff. If I need to have things done on the computer, email or stuff, I put it on the steps in the order in which it needs to be done, because the computer's upstairs, and it gets done. Nathaniel's the computer guy, and terrific. Anyway, to be serious once again, please use this wonderful technology and social media for good only. Do not embarrass others. Do not intimidate others. Do not embarrass your friends. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. There are two things that I hope you remember from this afternoon's presentation. Number one, the Holocaust did happen. You know, there are people out there who have their own agenda, who deny that the Holocaust has happened, and that's very dangerous. Number two, be kind and good and respectful towards one another. If you remember those two things, it'll have been worth your while to sit here for an hour. September 11th, 2001, none of us will ever be allowed to forget that date as long as we live. At that time, Nathaniel and I were in Florida visiting children and grandchildren. And because all planes were grounded, we chose to drive home. And as we approached New York and crossed the Verrazano Bridge that I mentioned earlier, amidst the smoking ruins of the Twin Towers, we could see the Statue of Liberty holding high the torch of freedom. It is that flame of freedom that the terrorists sought to destroy. But they could not, and they never will, because we will take good care of our freedom. We will safeguard our freedom. We will not and must not take our freedom for granted. Let us all, each and every one of us, redouble our efforts to be kind and good and respectful towards one another. And with that, I wish each and every one of you a healthy, happy, productive future in a world of love and peace. Thank you.
Four perfect pebbles in my hand, some made of granite, some of sand, found in this dark and desolate land. Four perfect pebbles in my hand. Mother comforts Albert and me, Father shields us from misery. No parent's love